My name is Aubrey Dalton. I'm 28 years old, and up until last week, I thought my older sister loved me. Pack up your things. You don't live here anymore. Her voice is cold, but the smile she gives the neighbor walking past our open garage is warm, like nothing just shattered inside me. I stand there barefoot on the oil-stained concrete, my duffel bag half-zipped and my birth certificate sticking out of the side like some cruel joke. I feel raw and exposed in a pair of college sweats I should have thrown out 3 years ago. Emily, my sister. My blood towers over me on the porch steps, phone in hand like a weapon. She always did have perfect posture. Even now, the sun makes her hair look like a shampoo commercial. I want to scream. I want to ask why, but I know what she'll say. You're an adult, Aubrey. Figure it out. That's what she always says when she doesn't want to admit she's chosen someone else over me. This time, it's her fiancé Evan, the smug real estate agent who never liked how often I visited. I wasn't visiting. I lived here. I paid rent. But Evan wanted his space, and Emily always folded when it came to him. I reach for my bag, and the zipper breaks completely. The contents spill out into the driveway notebooks. Army paperwork, my security clearance badge with the barcode I was told never to flash in public. It lands face up. Emily doesn't notice, but someone else does. A black sedan is idling across the street, tinted windows, engine too quiet for a neighborhood like ours. I see the flash of a phone camera behind the glass. I blink, and it's gone. I pretend I didn't see it. I've trained for this. I know what to do when my personal data is compromised. What I don't know is how to stop my hands from shaking as I scoop up the pieces of my life off the pavement. Emily slams the door. No goodbye. No eye contact. Just the lock sliding into place behind her like a final verdict. My chest burns, but I keep moving. I fit what I can into the bag, rip off the broken zipper, and head toward the bus stop. No car, no plan. I have $74 to my name and a contact number burned into my brain from my last rotation. A woman in Langley said, "If you ever feel cornered, call this." No questions asked. I thought she meant physically cornered. But emotional betrayal cuts deeper. I'm halfway to the station when my phone buzzes. Unknown number. I freeze. "Ms. Dalton," a man says. His voice is clipped formal. "Please don't speak. Just listen. There's a situation involving your records. You need to come with us. Now." I pause under a streetlight pulse hammering. In the corner of my eye, the black sedan pulls up beside me, slowly, deliberately. The rear window lowers. Inside sits a woman I never thought I'd see again, Director Sloan. The last time I stood in front of her, I was still in uniform. This time she nods once, "Get in." I first met Director Sloan at a secure base tucked behind an Air Force training compound outside El Paso. It wasn't even on the official maps. At the time, I was just a junior intelligence specialist, 25, fresh out of the ROTC pipeline, still blinking from the shell shock of being assigned to something they called asset reorientation and shadow protocol review. I had no idea what it meant. None of us did. That's the point. But the first time I briefed Director Sloan, I understood why I'd been selected. She had this presence like a hawk circling a field, silent, focused, always 10 steps ahead, and when she read my report on a compromised communications line in northern Jordan, she didn't blink. She just said, "Where would you trace it from?" I showed her my theory. 3 weeks later, it turned out I was right. That's when she started pulling me into deeper layers. Still, I wasn't special. Not officially. I was a number, a name on a file. Disposable. That's what Emily never understood my life in that house with her. And Evan was my only tether to anything resembling normal. My parents were gone. Plane crash. I was 16. She was 22, newly married the first time. She took me in back when she was still trying to prove to herself she could be a mom figure. She tried, I'll give her that. But she wasn't built for caretaking. She was built for control. As I got older, we drifted. I enlisted. Then came the training, then the clearance levels, the restricted hours, the words I couldn't say in the kitchen over coffee. Evan hated all of it. He said I was weird about work, that I disappeared too much, that I gave Emily excuses not to grow up. I wasn't trying to be a burden. I gave her money every month cooked when I was home cleaned, but when Evan moved in, everything shifted. He wanted a clean slate. That didn't include a moody younger sister who left duffel bags by the laundry room and got calls at 2 a.m. from D. See numbers. I remember the first time he joked about my job. "What are you, some kind of spy gonna laser us in our sleep?" Then he laughed. Emily laughed too, but nervously. She always hated confrontation. She stopped asking about my work after that, and I stopped offering. So the day she threw me out, it wasn't just about space, it was about shame. She was embarrassed of me. She didn't understand the silence, the clearances, the months I'd vanish and come back skinnier with a hollow look I couldn't explain. What she didn't know was that 2 months before I had been pulled from active rotation. There was an investigation underway. Someone had leaked something internal, and my name had come up not as a suspect but as a witness. I'd been cleared technically, but they benched me for optics. Director Sloan told me to stay visible, stay safe. So I did. I moved back in with Emily, and I smiled through it. Until Evan started locking his office when I was around. Until I noticed my laptop had been tampered with. Until I came home one day and my military documents were sitting in the trash. I confronted her. Emily swore it wasn't her. She said maybe Evan was just worried, but I knew then. They didn't trust me. I was a liability in my own house. Still, I didn't leave. I didn't want to admit I had nowhere else to go. When she kicked me out that night, it was like she ripped the last piece of my humanity out from under me. I felt feral, disposable. I walked like I was floating until that black sedan showed up. And Director Sloan, my former commanding officer, the woman who once told me, "You don't belong in the light, Dalton. You run the shadows," opened the door for me. In that moment, I remembered who I was. I slid into the back seat. She didn't say hello. Just, "We intercepted a digital pull on your profile an hour ago. Unclassified portal, civilian IP." I blinked. "Who it originated from your sister's property." My throat clenched. "You were right to call the emergency line," Sloan continued. "This isn't just about you anymore. We believe someone accessed restricted records through a back door using your discarded credentials." I shredded everything. Not everything. She turned a tablet toward me. On it was a photo of my security badge, the one that fell onto Emily's driveway. The one someone photographed from the black sedan earlier that evening. "You were being watched," she said. "The question is who tipped them off." I felt sick. Not just from the breach, but from the fact that Emily had been so eager to get rid of me she might have ignored or even enabled someone accessing things they didn't understand. Sloan looked me in the eyes for the first time since I got in the car. "We need your help, but you have to be sure. Because if you do this, there's no more sister. No more coming back here." I turned and looked out the window. The porch light on Emily's house flickered just once. And I knew. There was no home for me there anymore. Let me know when you're ready for Section 3. Conflict. The first time I saw the footage, I didn't want to believe it. It was grainy, pulled from a residential doorbell cam a few blocks down. Director Sloan had it queued up on her encrypted tablet, her lips pressed in that flat line that always preceded bad news. We were in a black operations vehicle parked near the edge of town, cloaked in just enough silence to let the buzzing tension settle between us. "Just watch," she said, handing me the screen. The timestamp read 8:42 p.m., barely 30 minutes after I'd been thrown out. There, walking briskly from the side of Emily's house, was Evan. He wasn't alone. A man followed him, taller, in a windbreaker face, shadowed by the porch light. Evan handed him a flat black folder. It was too thin to be one of my tactical dossiers, but not too thin to hold scanned copies. Then the man gave Evan something in return. A flash drive. Director Sloan tapped the screen to freeze the image. "That device," she said quietly, "is a known secure dump used by foreign intel contractors, usually encrypted with rotating keystroke software. We've intercepted 5 in the last year. 3 were traced back to civilian intermediaries. Like your brother-in-law." I shook my head. "No. Evan doesn't even know how to use a VPN. He once asked me if email needed postage. He doesn't need to understand what he's carrying. He just needs to be bought." I stared at the image, and I knew. That black folder, I'd used one just like it last year when briefing on Project Veil in a temporary site near DC. I kept it buried under my clothes, hidden, the only physical trace I had of an assignment they'd since scrubbed from every database I ever touched. I thought it was safe. I thought I was safe. Sloane reached forward and tapped the screen again. The video ended. Blackness returned. "This wasn't random," she said. "We believe your materials were accessed through a coordinated domestic breach, and your expulsion from the house was premeditated. Someone was told you were a vulnerability. Someone acted on it. You think my sister, I think she cut in that Emily got scared. And scared people don't always stay loyal." I stared at my hands. They didn't even look like mine anymore. Calloused pale, still smudged with ink from packing tape. I hadn't showered since yesterday. I could still smell Emily's rosewood perfume on my jacket. She would never intentionally— "You said yourself she was humiliated by you. That she didn't understand your work. She didn't. That makes you unpredictable. And to someone looking to control the narrative of their life, unpredictability is threat." I pressed my palms to my face. This wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation. The only family I had left had not only thrown me out, they may have sold me out. Sloane stood up, her body stiff with purpose. "You've got one choice, Dalton. We can ghost you, extract, reassign, start clean. Or I go back in." She nodded. "As what? An asset. Unofficially. You're burned in our system but not on theirs. They still see you as weak, disposable, which makes you perfect. And what's the objective? Recover the source. Identify who's handling the materials. Stop the leak before it escalates beyond our control." And Emily Sloane's expression didn't change. "She's not the mission. I didn't sleep that night. They set me up in a secure safe house on the other side of the county, inside a rundown apartment above an empty diner. The water barely ran. The fridge hummed like it had a secret. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to feel anything besides the hollow rage nesting in my chest. Emily, my sister, my blood. She had every chance to call, to ask, to even just wonder why I was carrying classified documents in the first place. Instead, she packed up my past and delivered it to strangers. No context, no questions, just betrayal. But the worst part? She probably thought she was doing the right thing, that I was dangerous, that Evan with his fake charm and backhanded concern had finally convinced her I wasn't worth the risk. That was the story she'd believed. Now it was my turn to write the truth. The next morning, I was activated under a black tag CIV Shield 9. It meant I was to operate as a civilian under direct internal surveillance. No badge, no backup, minimal tech. They gave me a small transmitter embedded in a necklace and a refurbished phone that looked like it came from 2012. Basic tools, Sloane said, for basic betrayal. I was being sent back into the same suburb that had tossed me out like trash. Not as a soldier, not as a spy, but as a sister. A threat in sheep's clothing. I would smile. I would wait. And I would find out who taught Emily how to sell a life she didn't understand. Because what she didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was what my job had really cost me, what I'd lost in silence, and what I was now willing to take back in full. The hardest thing wasn't slipping back into my sister's life unnoticed. It was pretending I hadn't already buried the version of her I once trusted. When I returned to the neighborhood, I didn't head straight for her door. I took my time observing the rhythms. Morning runners, school buses, Evan's car leaving precisely at 7:48 a.m. every weekday, same route, same lane. Emily would emerge an hour later with her toad and sunglasses striding past the hedges like she owned the block, as if her house hadn't been ground zero for a federal breach. She looked untouched, like I never happened. I spent a week collecting scraps of intel, watching who visited, what deliveries were made, what signals bounced off the network router I could still ping from a block away. Sloane's tech team worked in tandem, feeding me access logs and metadata. Something was off. And then Friday, a large black SUV pulled up in front of their house. Not flashy. Government issue, but unmarked. A man stepped out carrying a manila folder and a silver briefcase. I photographed every step. His face was familiar. I ran a match through the secure burner. Name, Roland Phelps. Affiliation, former DARPA contractor. Now private cyber weapons broker flagged by multiple agencies. Last known location Riyadh. That briefcase most likely insulated and quantum locked, which meant someone was paying a premium for secrets. And they were being delivered right to my sister's front porch. I felt sick, not because of what she might be hiding, but because I knew now without a shred of doubt that she had chosen this, the separation, the betrayal, the lies. I was never her mistake. I was her liability. And now she had reinforcements. I waited until nightfall to move, broke into their garage using a duplicated keypad code I memorized 2 years ago. Quiet. No trace. I found the briefcase in the storage freezer wrapped in Christmas paper. Classy. I didn't open it. I photographed it, encrypted the metadata, and transmitted the proof to Sloane's people. 2 minutes later, I got a simple reply. Hold position. Team en route. But before I could exhale, a soft click echoed behind me. A light turned on overhead. The dull glow of a garage bulb. I turned. Emily stood there barefoot in sweatpants holding a baseball bat. She didn't look scared, just tired. You always were the shadow, she said, creeping around, making excuses. I didn't move. Where's Evan? He's gone for the weekend. You know that. Roland Phelps came by today. She blinked. No denial. So what she said, he's a friend. Of whom Emily yours or Evan's new business friends. She looked away for a beat, then stepped forward. The bat lowered slightly. I tried, Mari, she said. I really did. I defended you. I told Evan you were just doing your job. And when did that change? She laughed bitterly. When your job became more important than everyone else. When I stopped knowing who I was to you. I swallowed. You were my anchor. You were a ghost. Her words hit harder than the truth ever could. You disappeared into missions, vanishing for weeks without a word. Then you came back silent and cold, like some haunted shell, and I had to pretend that was normal, that I didn't deserve to know. I opened my mouth, but she cut me off. Evan offered me answers. For once, I knew what you were hiding, what those files meant. I finally understood. I took a step closer. You understood nothing. No, she said. I saw what you really were, a threat to yourself, and to us. She looked at me, then really looked. Her eyes shone with something darker than sadness, almost pity. I didn't want to hurt you, but you were going to get us all hurt. And so what, I whispered. You handed over my files. You let Evan run black deals through your house. Through my blood, I protected my family, she said, voice firm. I am your family. She paused. The bat wavered. But then she said the thing I never thought I'd hear. Not anymore. My heart didn't break. It collapsed, quietly, fully, as if it had been waiting for this confirmation all along. I stepped back. Okay. She frowned. What I said? Okay. I turned toward the door. I left the briefcase, left her there under the garage light bat dangling from her hand like an unfinished sentence. Outside, the air was thick with night sounds, frogs, crickets, my own breath. The tactical team arrived 6 minutes later. Black van. Silent approach. I flagged them down and gave them the garage code. You're not coming with us, the lead agent asked. No, I said. There's nothing left for me inside. I walked back to the safe house. That night, I packed a small bag and left the burner phone on the counter. I turned off the tracker hidden in my necklace. And for the first time in a decade, I unplugged completely, because I realized something essential. You can fight enemies. You can outwit traitors. You can rebuild from sabotage. But you can't force someone to love you the way you loved them. Not even a sister. And that was my lowest point. Not the betrayal, not the mission failure, but the quiet death of hope. The sound of her saying, not anymore. I didn't speak for 2 days. Not to anyone. Not even myself. There was something about the silence after a personal war, not the kind with explosions, but the kind that sinks into your lungs and settles in your chest like a storm cloud that refuses to move. I wasn't staying at a base or a hotel. I'd retreated to a borrowed cabin upstate, no Wi-Fi, no cell towers in range, just a wood stove and a narrow cot that creaked when I turned in my sleep. I didn't come there to hide. I came to bleed privately. Grief is strange. You think it's loud, but it's not. It's a dull, constant hum, like static, like your body forgetting how to hold warmth. I replayed Emily's voice in my head 100 times. You were a ghost. She wasn't wrong. But I didn't deserve exile. She had handed over my security files. She had smiled in my face while undermining me. She had told me plainly that I wasn't family anymore. And I still missed her. That was the part that stung the most. I missed her even after she buried me. On the third morning, I made coffee over the flame and watched the light break over the trees. There were 2 squirrels chasing each other around a pine stump. It was the first time I'd seen life not shrouded in shadows since the garage confrontation. I realized something right then. Emily wasn't the root of my pain. She was the final thread that had snapped, but I'd been unraveling long before she pulled it. I wasn't okay. Hadn't been for a long time. Not since my last long-term assignment in Bavaria. Not since Sloan had asked me to disappear for 14 months under a false name to infiltrate a weapons contractor tied to embassy leaks. I hadn't spoken to anyone who knew me as Mari in over a year, so when I came back, I expected home to feel like a bomb, but what I found was a sister who didn't know me anymore, and maybe never really had. I set the mug down and stood up. It was time to reclaim something. Not revenge, not pride. Myself. I started with a call to Sloan, a secure line through a patched connection rigged to a radio tower 20 minutes away. He picked up on the second ring. "You're alive," he said, voice flat with relief. We swept the site, cases in custody, and Emily untouched, cooperating. "You sure you don't want a pause?" "I'm not here to burn her," I said, "but I'm not covering for her either." Sloan was quiet for a moment. Then, "We intercepted a signal last week. It wasn't her name. It was yours." That jolted me. What kind of signal encrypted handoff? Her husband used your alias as leverage with the buyer. I swallowed hard. So, if I'd gone dark completely, you'd be sitting in a room with 0 rights. In another country. Because of Evan. Because your sister trusted the wrong man. The wind howled faintly through the pine. "What do you want from me, Sloan?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, "but I think you want something from yourself." He was right. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted clarity, closure. I wanted the version of myself who could look in the mirror without wondering if she deserved the betrayal. I called an old contact, Shelby Whitmore. Once an analyst, now an independent security consultant who helped veterans transition back to civilian life. We weren't close, but she had been kind to me during a difficult time. She picked up with surprise in her voice. "Mari, it's Elara now," I said. "At least until I figure things out." There was a long pause. "What do you need?" I exhaled. "I need to build something, not a cover, not a trap. A real life." She didn't ask questions, just said, "Meet me in DC next week. I've got someone you should talk to." That was it. The first stone laid in a path I hadn't walked in years. I started writing again, too. Not reports, journals, real words, memories, feelings I'd repressed so deep they had to claw their way out. I wrote about my first covert op, about the man I almost married before he vanished on a mission I wasn't allowed to ask about Emily braiding my hair when we were kids and telling me she'd never leave me. I didn't write to forgive her. I wrote to forgive myself. And slowly something in me began to thaw. I hiked. I slept. I let the cabin become a healing chamber. And then one night I got a message on the old backup satellite device. One line. He flipped on her, said she was involved. Evan had cracked under pressure, and he'd dragged Emily with him. The woman who had stood in front of me with a bat calling me a ghost now faced criminal exposure. And just like that, the path I'd started to walk split in 2. Do I testify? Do I shield her? Do I disappear? That night, I stood outside the cabin in my boots and coat and stared up at the stars. I realized I didn't need to decide right then. I didn't need to carry it all at once. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't be silent again. I wouldn't be invisible. I wouldn't be her scapegoat. Whatever came next, I would face it, And this time, it would be on my terms. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically. The HVAC worked just fine. But there was a chill in the air that settled deep into your chest, especially when you were the one called to the stand. I didn't wear a uniform. I wore a simple black suit, my hair pinned back my heels, silent on the polished wood floor. I didn't want to show up as the ghost of Elara Maddox, the covert agent. I wanted to show up as a woman who had nothing left to hide. The judge called my name. I stood, swore in, and took the seat behind the mic. Emily was already there, seated at the defense table, dressed in charcoal gray, jaw tight. She hadn't looked at me once. I wasn't even sure she would. When I'd gotten the subpoena 3 weeks earlier, I'd expected it Evan had broken, and in the process, he'd implicated her in 2 key handoffs of proprietary information. Not classified, but sensitive. Enough to raise red flags. Enough to drag her into it. She'd denied everything. She claimed he used her name. Claimed she never knew what he was doing. And I was there to testify to whether that could possibly be true. Sloan had left the decision up to me. You want to protect her, he'd asked? You can, but it means you carry it forever. And if I tell the truth, she might not walk out of there. I had taken days to answer. But in the end, I remembered what she said to me in that garage. You were a ghost. She'd made peace with me disappearing. She'd erased me. She'd chosen comfort over truth. Now I would do the opposite. I first noticed irregularities during my return from Bavaria. I began voice calm, hands folded. Certain aliases I had retired were being pinged in internal databases. IP addresses associated with my accounts showed login attempts from my sister's home network. The room held its breath. Emily didn't flinch. I continued. Initially, I assumed it was Evan. He had access to the home systems. But the activity matched times when Emily was home alone, when Evan was confirmed out of state. Still, she didn't turn. But her attorney did shift in his seat. Did you confront her? The prosecutor asked. No, I said, not directly. I tried to gather more data. Then I was compromised by a double blind in Portland and had to go fully dark for 6 months. By the time I came home, the trail was cold, but the damage wasn't. And what damage was that? I turned my head, then finally looking at Emily. She didn't just give away a login or a phone, I said. She gave away my name. Emily's jaw twitched. Her knuckles whitened on the armrest. She didn't know what it meant, I added softly, but she knew it was wrong. And when I tried to talk to her, she called me a ghost, threw my things into the street, told me I didn't belong. That was when her eyes met mine. And for the first time in years, I saw her not the sister I grew up with, but the woman who had spent so long pretending I didn't exist that she started to believe it. There was no fire in her eyes, just silence. Do you believe she knowingly assisted her husband in identity manipulation? The prosecutor asked. I didn't blink. Yes. The courtroom didn't react. No gasps, no murmurs. Just the clicking of keys from a reporter in the corner, but Emily's head bowed, and I knew it was over. Outside the courthouse, the wind was biting. I stood by the stone steps watching reporters scatter for sound bites and footage. I had nothing to say, no prepared statement, but someone did come up to me. A woman in a navy coat, sharp eyes, confident posture. Elara Maddox, she asked. I nodded. She extended a hand. Director Helen McCrae. National Security Intelligence Committee. I've followed your work. That caught me off guard. I thought my work was redacted. She smiled faintly. Not from everyone. I shook her hand. It was firm, assured. I'm not here to recruit you, she added. Not unless you want to be. Then why are you here? She reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. A small polished badge. No seal, no title. Just an encrypted embedded chip and my initials etched along the edge. This isn't a job, she said. It's a courtesy. We owe you more than a closed file and a silent thank you. I stared at it, heart tightening. Thank you, I said, voice barely a whisper. McCrae nodded once. And if you ever want to rewrite the rules instead of follow them, you know where to find me. Then she was gone. And I was left standing on the steps with a badge that wasn't really a badge and a future that was no longer dictated by what I'd lost. Later that evening, I found a quiet place by the Potomac and sat with a notebook. I wrote Emily a letter. I didn't mail it. I wasn't sure if I ever would, but I wrote what I needed to. I told her I forgave her not because she deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry the weight of her decisions anymore. I told her I missed her, and I wished she had told me the truth even once. I told her that whatever happened next, I hoped she would find herself the way I had. I signed it simply E. Then I folded the paper, tucked it into the badge case, and slid both into my bag. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I wasn't a ghost. I was Elara Maddox, and I was finally free. It's strange what finally makes you feel real again. For me, it wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't even Director McCrae's visit. It was the silence the next morning, the silence that wasn't filled with expectation or danger or blame. I sat on the balcony of my small apartment, a cup of black coffee in one hand, the Potomac shimmering in the distance. No case files on the table, no burner phones buzzing, no encrypted messages flashing on a hidden screen. Just morning light and a kind of peace I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. My old life was over, but I wasn't mourning it anymore. I was learning to live in the after. I took a job no one would expect, not for someone like me. Teaching at a local community college just outside D.C., adjunct professor of security ethics and psychological operations. The first time I walked into the classroom, 27 students stared at me like I was just another academic. They didn't know I'd once crawled through air vents to avoid diplomatic security or memorized entire ledgers by candlelight in the Andes, and that was okay. I let them think I was normal. Until I wasn't. One of the students, Marcus, raised his hand on day 2. "Why are you qualified to teach this?" he asked in that half-arrogant tone young men sometimes use. I smiled. Just a little. "I've lived every case study we'll be covering." He didn't challenge me again. My apartment stayed sparse, clean lines, neutral tones, a single framed photo on the mantel. It wasn't of Emily. It wasn't of the family. It was one of me, younger, tired, smiling, despite it seated on a rooftop somewhere in Cairo, next to a handler who didn't survive that mission. He deserved to be remembered, so I kept him close. Sometimes I'd talk out loud to the photo, ask him if he'd believe I was grading papers now debating policy with eager 20-year-olds who still thought truth and power were always on the same side. He'd probably laugh. I think I do too. The letter to Emily stayed in my drawer for months, unsent, unread. But it wasn't forgotten. One rainy night in March, I took it out again, read it back slowly, word by word. No anger rose in my throat, no bitterness, just the dull ache of someone who had loved deeply and been let down more deeply still. And then, a sound. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered on instinct. Hello. A pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in over a year. Elara. My breath caught. Emily. Yeah, She broke off. I heard what you said in court, what you didn't say too. I told the truth, I said softly. I know, she whispered. And thank you for not burying me with it. I didn't respond immediately. There was too much and too little to say. After a long silence, she added, he took a plea. He's serving 18 months. I'm on probation, community service. They suspended my clearance indefinitely, I figured I said. Another pause. I'm in Baltimore now, she said, trying to figure out who I am without all the lies. That makes 2 of us. She laughed, but it was thin. Would you ever want to meet? I closed my eyes, then opened them again. I'll think about it, I said honestly. Okay, a beat. I'm sorry, Elara, for everything. I know. And with that, she hung up. Not because we were healed, but because the door once slammed was no longer locked. A month later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a photo. Us, young, barefoot, sitting on the porch steps in Colorado. I was 10. She was 8. We were holding sparklers, grinning into the sunset, back before the world got complicated. back before truth became something we had to choose between love and loyalty. I placed the photo beside the one from Cairo. No labels, just memory. Spring brought change. My students turned in their final papers. I graded late into the night, coffee in one hand, red pen in the other. One paper caught my eye, not for its perfection, but for its vulnerability. The student had written about deception in family dynamics, about how betrayal by those closest cuts the deepest, and about how healing wasn't a clean process. It was jagged, slow, and often unfair. But it was possible. At the bottom, I wrote just one sentence in return. You're stronger than you know, and so much less alone than you think. When I handed it back in class, the student blinked twice, then gave me a small nod. He understood. In April, I was invited to speak at a private conference hosted by the NSIC. Just 20 minutes, a panel on resilience after exposure. I walked on stage with steady steps, looked out into the darkened room, and for the first time told the full story, not the operational code names, not the missions, but the personal cost. The identity loss, the pain, the sisterhood fractured, the strength rebuilt not through vengeance, but through presence. When I stepped off stage, Director McCrae met me backstage. She handed me something small, a pin. It wasn't official, it wasn't classified, but it was shaped like a phoenix. I thought it suited you, she said. It did. Now when people ask me what I do, I tell them I teach. When they ask what I used to do, I just smile and say, something a little messier. And when they ask how I got through what I did, I tell them the truth. Not by getting even, not by burning everything down, but by standing in the wreckage long enough to see what was still standing and choosing to build again. Because revenge fades, but becoming whole again. That's the real ending. And mine is just beginning.